This morning we have Dr. Sylvia Casabianca. I love her last name. I wish I could speak Spanish better, but my Spanish is pretty poor. I understand some things, but she's going to share her background. It's quite interesting. And she's also going to tell you a little bit about her most recent book. So with that, Sylvia, please go ahead, and we can't wait to hear your story.
Thank you, Margaret, and I'm very happy to be here and thankful for the invitation. And I hope that we can make the best out of this little time that we're going to spend together. I don't know if, okay, so let me see. I just want to have what I want. Okay, so so we chose this topic for today. I'm gonna talk about myself within the presentation, so I'm not gonna do like a telling you a lot of the stories at the beginning. I am gonna insert it into what we talk. And so the first thing that you will see is this drawing that I like very much. I am a Reiki practitioner. I'm a Reiki master, and I teach Reiki. I used to, because with the COVID, we haven't had the opportunity to have those gatherings. But one of my students, I asked him to do this drawing, and it represents something that I believe is very important. The topic of my most recent book, the book is called Heart Minded. It's about conscious evolution from fear to solidarity. And this drawing represents the topics in the book. And so what you see is, you see the black girl in the back is kind of concerned, looking at the vital signs, the electrocardiogram and the electroencephalogram. Something is not right, she's concerned. And then you have on the left, there's this lady who is kind of working on this big thing, which is the brain. Something is going on with the brain. And then you have the happy one on the right. And what she's doing, if you look closer, is connecting the heart to the brain. So that's what we're going to talk about today, actually. So that therefore the title is Mindfully Compassionate. Maybe speaking of compassionate, something that we associate with the heart, and mindfully is putting the whole mind into what we feel. So this is my website if anybody is interested in looking into that. And this is one of the most interesting discoveries of the maybe 40 years, 50 years before today. The advances in neuroscience have shown us that we're actually hardwired for love, which is interesting because when we look at what is happening in the humanity and all the wars that we have and the conflicts and the divides and all that, say, so what happened? So if we are hardwired for love, how is it that we have so much conflict going on? And it is evident that yes, we're born with love, because you see these acts of kindness very early. There was a psychologist many years ago who spoke about that. His name is Martin Hoffman. And Martin Hoffman started to observe that even the babies, the newborn babies, were reacted to the cry of other babies. And they thought, well, maybe that's just because the noise disturbs them. And when they looked closer, they found that no, because if they used like a recording of a similar sound, it was not something that sounded a little bit like a baby cry, they would not respond in the same way. It was actually when somehow they perceived the distress of another kid that they will start crying also. So this I just want to establish this at the very beginning, that we have that potential, and that potential can grow if we nurture it. However, we've been fed these ideas that we know that we're born savage, that if we somehow the they don't civilize us in some way, we end up fighting and doing terrible things. I don't know if you remember this movie. What was that? The Lord of the Flies, where there's these guys who are in an excursion of some type, and they end up in an island with no adults, and they divide into two groups, and only two of the kids end up being good kids and trying to rescue everybody and do the right things to provide for everybody, and the others one pretty much go to war. And I think this is a record version of what really happens. Actually, there is a very interesting book called it's Rifkin. It's about the civilization, the empathy and civilization, and he speaks about that, and he says actually the majority of people are good people, and the majority of people are empathic and compassionate. But what we hear in the news is what breaks the norm. And so we're so surprised by the acts of unkindness and conflict that this is what we end up sharing. So the neurologists, the neuroscientists have been studying these circuits in the brain, circuits for love and empathy. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, because these, you can activate these circuits voluntarily. Sometimes we don't do it because we also have some circuits that are automatically responding to fear, to threats. And we respond with what we know as the stress response, or the fight or flight response. But that's not the only response that we have to threats or to fear. So now we know that love and compassion constitute an evolutionary advantage. Our species would not have survived without having the capacity to understand the others, to feel compassion, and to associate to solve problems together. There's also enough evidence that we tend to create attachments, and you see that with mom and baby. It's very easy to see, but we see it also with the relationship that is created between father and children, the bonds that we create when we get older with friends, and then maybe with the partner, and then maybe with the spouse. So we have this capacity and this tendency to create attachments. And it is interesting to me that these discoveries are so recent in the Western society, because in the Eastern cultures, 5,000 years ago, the Ayurvedic medicine, the Chinese medicine was already talking about the heart, about compassion, about how we could cultivate the feelings of love and empathy and compassion for all their beings, just by being present, but having, practicing what is called the contemplative practices, like meditation, like just contemplation. And still, some of the tribes, some of the indigenous people that still survive, they still do that. So they sit in circles, they share wisdom, they talk about their problems, they find solutions together, and the people who are capable of empathy and compassion are very valued in the community. So this is a drawing or a picture of how the brain what we know about the brain. So this is portraying only what we call the emotional brain. So we can, we have, you know, if the figure is clear for you, you can see the number one here, down here, that says the brain stem. The brain stem is a part of the brain where the most automatic functions are controlled. And I'm talking about breathing and heart beating and all these things. So also, sorry, let me go back. And also, you know, the basic functioning like eating, sleeping, and breathing have to do with that, what we call the first floor of the brain. It's very automatic. So you, something startles you when you're at home and you immediately react by trying to fight or fly. It's normal. This is what we do. And then, but there are other structures in the brain, a little higher. We call that the second floor of the brain, where we have also some circuits that account for the another response that is called the dopaminergic response, and accounts for motivation, but also competition. So we live right now in a society that has what Fred Prebick called a dopaminergic society. So we compete a lot. We feed competition, actually. We even the education uses competition because we think that's a good way to stimulate the children, and the children will do better if we make them, you know, fight to be the first one and the better. And that has some problems because these circuits here tend to be, you know, these are the same circuits that make us look for rewards and pleasure, and they are the same ones that are enhanced and problematic in an addict. So when we can get addict to everything, you know, not only drugs and substances, but also to, you know, this competition. We want to be the first one, and it becomes like an obsession, and then we can be addicted to work and to winning in any conversation. We want to be the ones who are right, and this creates a lot of trouble, and we see that in the political arena, and we see that in everything, sports and in the intellectual world. And is not a good thing because it is addictive. It becomes something that is difficult to escape from. But we have developed also some circuits that are up here in the prefrontal cortex that are very interesting, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So, see, women have been assigned caring functions since very old times, and it has to do with the fact that we birth children, and so even in the gather societies, you know, the hunters and gatherers, women played a different role because it was difficult to go hunting with a belly. You know, it was difficult to go hunting when you had two children and you had to, you know, bring them tagging along. So so there was a division of labor, so to speak, in the communities, and women started to develop the capacity to care for others, and it's still happening today because you see the most of the you know, professions where that are related to care, such as teaching and such as you know, the healthcare. There's majority of women in those professions. We do pretty well in those professions. That's our strength. Not because we cannot do everything that we want to do in that sense professionally, but we are really, really good at taking care of others. So Shelley Taylor, a very interesting researcher, she was looking at the ways we responded to stress. And when I mean we, sorry, I mean women. And because she noticed that there was a difference in the way women and men responded to stress. And she discovered that besides those circuits that we talked before, that, you know, the ones that take us to fight or flight, and the ones that take us to compete, there are other circuits in the brain, there are other responses that she called the tend and befriend response. And then another researcher, Paul Gilbert in England, developed the idea a little bit further. So we have three systems. So we have the threat system that we talked about, the fight or flight. We have the drive system that motivates us to compete and win, etc. But we have the affiliation system also, which is what Taylor called the tend and befriend system. All the systems are related to each other. There's a relationship between them. But one of the problems is when the threat system or the drive system are activated, the affiliation system doesn't work so well. And you see that, right? You see that all the time when if you're fighting with somebody, and you're pushing each other's buttons, what are you doing? You're responding from the threat system, and you are not listening. You are not really present in the moment, which will be the mindfulness part. You're not present in the moment. You're making history. Right? In Colombia, we have a joke. The joke is that when we're fighting, we get not hysterical, but historical, because we start saying, you know, yeah, because 5 years ago you did such and such, and 2 years ago again you did that, and I remember last month when you da 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 da. So we become historical, and we are not reasonable in that moment that this system is activated. But it is activated because we feel a threat. What's this threat? The threat is that we're not going to be respected. Maybe we're not being taken into account. Maybe the person who is pushing our buttons is not admiring us anymore, or maybe loving us. So we feel the threat and we respond from that system. So the focus of this response is safety. The response is, as I said, fight or flight. And the feelings that we experience when this system is activated are, oh, sorry about the typo there. It should be another E in feelings. The feelings are of fear, rage, insecurity, and anxiety. And in other occasions, say, for example, that you have a job, or you're competing for a contract. So the drive system is activated, and the focus of the responses, the behaviors associated with the activation of this drive system is the focus is on achievement, competing, and facing challenges. So it's a needed system. I'm not saying it is not, but when it is activated all the time, when this is the system that is driving our lives, then we sometimes don't have much regard for the other. Because of course, if you're competing, you're making rivals, right? And so I see I'm a counselor, I'm a mental health counselor. I was a medical doctor before, and I got into counseling because I started to work with adolescents back in Colombia, and I wanted to really be able to work with this population of fascinating people. And I like the field of education. I've been an educator my whole life, and so I decided to quit medicine pretty much, and got a master's degree in Canada on art therapy because I needed tools to work with this population. So I became a mental health counselor. And when I came to this country 21 years ago, I validated my titles and I continue to be a counselor. And when I see couples, one of the things that always calls my attention is that sometimes the counseling room feels more like a courthouse, you know, a courtroom is a courtroom. And so they want me to be the arbiter of whatever dispute they have, and they want to somehow prove that they are right. And that's because this drive system is activated, you know. So they are not listening. Again, there's no mindfulness at all, you know. There's no compassion at all. There's no empathy. They are not trying to understand what's the other person's point of view. They are just trying to prove that they are right. And that's the source of a lot of problems. Now, we always have the chance, the opportunity to activate the affiliation responses. And when these responses are activated, first of all, we care for ourselves. Because in the other ones, I mean, we're on adrenaline. When we are in the threat system, we're on pure adrenaline. When we are on the drive system, we are on pure dopamine. And so there's no soothing, there's no, we're in stress all the time. And that's not good for our health because it affects our blood pressure, and it makes our heart beat faster, and it creates a lot of trouble in the body. The body works in a different way when we are flooded by the hormones and the neurotransmitters that are associated with those responses. But in the affiliation response, it's completely different. In this case, we're focused on self-care. We cannot take care of the others without taking care of ourselves first. And we start displaying responses that are more associated with empathy. And I define empathy as the capacity to, you know, there's two kinds of empathy. There's affective empathy and there's cognitive empathy. The affective empathy is it can happen even when we're watching movies. So that's not so important. But it's good that we can feel that. It's like you were crying because something bad happened to another person, because we see somebody crying and we can get emotional. And it's called, sometimes some researchers call that an emotional contagion. But that's a good aspect of empathy, and it is needed for so many, you know, for so many reasons. But there's another aspect of empathy that we develop consciously, and this aspect of empathy is called the cognitive empathy. We make a vow. We want to consciously have this respect for others, this understanding of others. Because we tend to see the world from our own perspective. It's very difficult to understand others. It's difficult. You know, it's difficult for men to understand women. It's difficult for women to understand men. It's difficult for us to understand anything that looks out of the norm. It's difficult for us to understand other cultures, because we tend to think that whatever we believe in, the way our lifestyle, etc., is what is right. And so, but when we develop this capacity, this is cognitive capacities, an intellectual capacity, if you want, to understand others, then we start asking, how would I feel if I'm in that person's shoes? Or how is that person feeling? You can ask any of those questions and start understanding what it's like to be the other person. And so when we display these affiliation responses, we're warmer in our relationships with others. We're kinder in those relationships. And so what happens is we start being in a different place emotionally. We're calmer. It's easier to trust the other person, and we feel safer. because of the quality of the relationships that we're developing when we are using the affiliative response. We have, this is something that I'm very invested in. We have developed a project at the Florida Gulf Coast University that is all about promoting empathy, compassion, and kindness. And so there's a few classes that people are taking there that they opened that you see the students developing kindness projects. How can they be kind in the community? So they, instead of just defining it intellectually, they are trying to find how to pass on kindness and compassion is a very nice thing. And I hope that more and more maybe Hodges can take over one of these projects. And it's so fascinating that people feel so much better with themselves and others when we're kind and when we are compassionate. I don't know, Margaret, how many people do we have right now? I am not seeing all the thumbnails. Let me see if I can see them. I cannot see them. Margaret?
We have 4.
Okay, so, because it would be nice if we could do a little exercise here. Is everybody fine with doing an exercise here?
Sure.
Okay. So this is a very simple exercise. I don't know if you guys are sitting in a comfortable place. Nobody, sit as comfortably as you can. And if you may, if it is comfortable for you, you may close your eyes. And we're going to do an exercise that is a focusing exercise, let's put it that way. So if you're with your eyes closed, you can take a deep breath. Just to remember that you breathe. Sometimes we do that automatically and we're not aware of how precious it is to breathe deeply and replenish your lungs and oxygenate your blood. And I want you to become an observer. So I want you to be aware of the place in which you are right now. With your eyes closed, try to feel the light coming from the windows. You can feel the tick-tock of that clock also. And just be an observer, just become aware of your chest expanding and contracting when you breathe. And we're going to do something that we call the scanning. I want you to imagine a light. Imagine that you are under a light, pretty much like under one of these machines that make photocopies. And so you know the light going from one end to the other. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to imagine a light that is going to scan our body from head to toes. So starting on the top of the head, so just imagine this light is scanning your whole head. And now your neck, scanning every tissue, every muscle, every bone, every tendon, every blood vessel. And again, the scanning going down. Scanning now your shoulders, your upper back, your upper chest. The scan going down, the light scanning the rest of your chest, the whole back, your arms all the way down to your fingertips. Imagine the light scanning your lungs and your heart, and continue to go down to your belly, scanning all the organs inside your abdomen, scanning lower back and hips and pelvis. Going down to your thighs. Become aware of the tension in your lower back and your thighs. And scan that tension and feel it dissolving as the scanning continues. Continue going down to your knees, your legs, your ankles, your feet, your toes. And turn your attention again to your breathing. And just pay attention to see if it has changed a little bit. Maybe it has to slow down a bit. And again, take a deep breath. And when you're ready, open your eyes and just see if something changed in the way you are present in this moment, in the way you're feeling. If people want to open the mics and unmute yourself and make a comment, as I would love to hear from you guys.
I don't know. I felt so relaxed. I almost fell asleep.
There you go. Okay. Anybody else wants to say anything? Okay. We'll go on. Are there any questions at this point? I can also take questions.
Not for me.
Okay, there you go. All right, so we're gonna go further here. So we were talking about the stress response, and you see this is the zebra. You know, things have becoming a little bit more sophisticated, right, with technology and everything. So it's the zebra escaping the tiger. And this is what we're talking about. The stress response has become a little bit more sophisticated. So this is referring to that very important response that all animals have. You know, there's the fight or flight. You see a rabbit, and the rabbit has a different response, because sometimes instead of trying to fight us or to just fleeing, the rabbit can get frozen. That's part of that response. So something happens and they just froze. Okay. Then we talk about the drive system, and we explain that it is more pervasive among, this is what, when we're working, that works a lot, that the drive system is active. And this is what takes us to compete with each other. And what I was saying before is that when you're in this kind of position, love is not what is elicited, is it? So will he say, I love you, please stop? That's not going to happen, right? So these responses compete with each other. We cannot display compassionate responses when we are competing. We are just having a rival. We compete with a rival. We don't. It's not a loving thing. This is a really nice picture of a wave. And this is to explain that when we are in the drive system response, when this is the response that we are using, we have tunnel vision. We're not seeing the whole picture. We're just focusing the vision in what we want to achieve. So we're goal-oriented in that moment. We're focused on the destination. And sometimes the risk, when we're focused on the destination is that we miss the journey. So that's not compassionate and that's not mindful. And because the activation of this system is linked to the experience of pleasure, that's why, as I said before, it can lead to addictions. One of the problems with this system is that it is really difficult to deactivate. And the kind of societies in which we live that makes us, want things permanently, is the having society. I need to have these and I need to achieve these and I need to get there. So it is difficult to get into a different response because it is fueled all the time with this society that promotes competition. One of the things with COVID is very interesting is it changes, or it should, I think, change our perspective about everything, Sometimes I get into my closet and I look at the clothes that I have, and I'm not a person that has a very big closet full of a lot of clothes, but still, they're probably 95% of the things that I have in that closet haven't been used in the past year. So I haven't needed to, because I've been mostly secluded. And it makes you wonder, about this need that we have to have stuff. And that's all motivated. That's all when we are in this drive system, where we think that that we need to look prettier than the other when we go to a reception, that we need to have more than our parents have because that proves that we are more successful, etc. It's a society that competes. And it makes we go into these ethical dilemmas where we are all the time thinking, should I do what I want? Or should I go do what I should do? And so that's why we see corruption in the high spheres. That's why we see that, because it is people have gotten so used to having and making money and having success that at some point, even the moral principles relax. So this problematic. And this, when we're competing, also we get this false sense of freedom, and we can be lousy with our responsibilities because we want to do what we want instead of what we should be doing. So my vote goes to developing the Tend and Befriend system, and this needs to be nurtured in children. Empathy is present, as we say, when we're born, but if we don't feed it, if we don't stimulate it from the very beginning, teaching children to be considerate with others, to try to understand how the others feel in any situation. When our children when they commit a transgression, when they are aggressive towards another child, if we don't have them reflect on what the other person felt, they don't develop empathy and compassion. And they are not doing anything to stimulate this tandem befriend system. As you may be aware, now that we know about, the brain is, we thought, I remember my mother saying all the time, in Spanish, you say, loro viejo no aprende a hablar, which means an old parrot cannot learn how to talk. And she said that to every time that we said, Mom, why don't you take this class or whatever? And in those days, that was unthinkable. She would say, no, I cannot learn those things at my age. And when I say my age, she was already maybe 39 or something, and she already believed that. It was a common belief in our societies in those days. I remember I am a Traeger practitioner because that's one of the things that I learned when I came to this country is a very nice movement therapy. And Milton Traeger, who was the guy who invented this therapy, he believed in repetition of movement, and he believed in being present, and he believed in creating new patterns of movement that will let us be free of pain and contractions. And when he had invented this, and when he was 39, he wanted to go to medical school, and he applied to several medical schools in the country, and they say you cannot get into medical school because you're too old. And that was the norm, that when you arrived at that age, the belief was that you were incapable of learning anything new. Now we know that's not true, because we know the brain is plastic, is malleable, and can change. So we need to stimulate this response to it's not going to come spontaneously if we don't feed it, if we don't nurture it. So there's a big difference between coping together. These are communities in other countries, other places. And this is very common, that people go and get the water together, that people cook together, and they develop this sense of collectivity. So when there's a disaster, the very normal response is to get together to solve what needs to be solved. So there's a very big difference between coping together and coping alone. What do you say? So back to the emotional brain. So we've talked about the basic responses, the fight or flight responses. We have talked about the dopaminergic system, and we also talk about how when the prefrontal cortex, which is where is what activates when we are conscious, where that's associated, is activated when we display the tend and befriend system responses. I don't know if you have heard about the mirror neurons. There was this guy in a lab in Italy many years ago, not so many years ago, like maybe 20 some years ago. And they were trying to find what areas of the brain in a monkey, in a macacus, activated when the monkey did something like peel a banana, for example. And so they were mapping the brain, they were doing that, and they had mapped this area that activated when the monkey was peeling a banana. And then they were in a break, and the monkey still had his wires in the head, and they were very surprised to see that there was somebody in the lab actually eating a banana, and the same areas activated in the monkey, the same areas that had activated before when it was the monkey who was eating the banana. So that's interesting. So they started to see what was going on, and they discovered a group of neurons in both sides of the brain, and they called them mirror neurons. because these are neurons that are related to empathy. They are neurons that are involved in any when we imitate somebody's behavior, when when you sneeze, somebody else sneezes, when you yawn, everybody in the room starts yawning. These kind of things are associated with these mirror neurons that that helps us understand the other person, that makes us react in synchrony with the other person. So this is another area in the brain that is associated with empathy and compassion. So the importance for me, this is my idea, the importance for me of stimulating empathy and compassion is this circle, right? That if I care, if these are the responses that I use, empathy and compassion, then when I care, what do? I serve others, right? I am inclined to service. And when I serve, I'm in a community, so I bond with others. And when I bond with others, the brain starts displaying the soothing responses. And when we soothe, we can thrive, because it's not competition when it was going to make us thrive. It has, competition has a top. You cannot go beyond the cap. You cannot go beyond that. Yeah, we thrive when we really care for others. So this is the advantage that I see in being mindfully compassionate. And I put these two words together because you cannot really be compassionate if you're not mindful of how what you do affects others. And here is an interesting quote from Teilhard de Chardin. I don't know if you heard about this. He was a priest, and he was a very interesting guy who came up with also some theories about what religion needs to help us do, which is love each other. And he said, someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness the energies of love, and then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire. Okay, so I'm ready for your questions now.
Anybody have any questions?